begin. So good morning, my name is Gethin Nadin, and today we're going to be talking about recognition. If you can move on to the next slide, please. The whole of this month, we've been celebrating everything to do with employee recognition. Last week was Employee Appreciation Day, and at Benefex we have a pretty new comprehensive report out this month called The Psychology of Recognition. And we'll put the link in the chat so you can go and download that and read that. But really good report. The marketing team has done a really good job. And myself and Lauren have both contributed to that from Benefex. So read that. It's an awful lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today. And we spoke about our webinar last week. It's contained within that report. So awful lot of research. But on to today. So next slide, please. This morning, I am joined by Genevieve Deacon, live from South Africa, as you probably heard at the start. Drinking wine, going on holiday, meeting up with people, doing all the things we can't do. So good morning, Jen. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Gethin. Thanks for asking. And yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. And so for those who don't know anything about you, could you please tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background, please?
Yeah, perfect. So I am South African, which I'm sure you can actually hear by the accent. So even if my name is French, I'm born and bred South African. I grew up in Cape Town, but I'm living in Johannesburg now. I studied at Stellenbosch University. So if those of you who know about Stellenbosch, it is very famous for its wine route, which is where my love for wine ultimately began. But needless to say, I did pass my master's degree and went on to register as an organizational psychologist with our Health Professions Council here in South Africa, which is the equivalent to the BPS, the British Psychology Society in the UK. So yeah, after I registered, I got into the corporate world. I held a couple of roles in organizational development, performance management, looking at employee engagement, really helping organizations be more fruitful and healthier places for individuals to work and bring their best selves to work. So I've been in the corporate world, or was in the corporate world, until I joined PeopleFull as a principal consultant, and pretty much was in the financial industry. So I worked at an insurance company, and then my last stint was within a bank, one of our biggest banks here in South Africa. So that's just a little bit about me.
Excellent, thank you very much. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So as usual, we want these webinars to be as interactive as possible. So please use the Q&A and chat functionality to ask us any questions. If you want to share your own insights or comments or things you'd like to discuss, please do that as well. So we want these to be interactive as possible. As I mentioned, they always go really well when you share your own thoughts and opinions. So please do that. And so before I move on to ask Jen some questions, I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive on what physically happens to us when we get recognition for something. What happens to our brain when we get recognition, I think is pretty fascinating and illustrates to us just how important recognition is to being human. So the research shows us that when somebody thanks you, compliments you, or appreciates you, there's a physical change in our brains. And this is important for employers, I think, to understand, because better understanding of the physiology of kind of gratitude and recognition can help us to harness some of those employee experience and employee well-being benefits. And when we express gratitude and we receive the same, our brain releases dopamine and serotonin. And those are two crucial neurotransmitters responsible for our emotions that make us feel good. They enhance our mood very quickly, making us feel happy from the inside. And that's all associated with things like motivation, focus, and positivity. And so this means that the same areas of the brain light up when we get recognition as we do when we experience pleasure or we socialize with friends. And some of the most recent research in neuroscience has shown that when we receive praise from a colleague, it activates the same brain areas of our brain that are activated when we receive money or romantic attention. That's something called the ventral striatum and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. So compliments and praise also release that neurotransmitter dopamine. And so what that kind of shows us is that by consciously practicing gratitude and recognition, so gratitude for the things we have in life, the people we work with and the help and support that they give us, we can help some of those neural pathways to strengthen themselves and create a pretty permanent, grateful and positive nature within ourselves. And that creates a really virtuous circle, because what happens when we thank and receive thanks on a regular basis just continues to make us happier and more positive. But it also turns out that those neural connections between kind of gratitude and giving are both deep, kind of literally and figuratively. There's a region deep in the frontal lobe of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and that's key to supporting both of those things. And anatomically speaking, that region is wired up to be a kind of hub for processing, and that processes the value of risk and reward. And so it's connected to even deeper brain regions that provide a kick of neurochemicals in the right circumstances. So practicing gratitude shifts the value of giving in that prefrontal cortex, and it kind of changes what they call the exchange rate in the brain. So giving to charity becomes more valuable than if we just receive money for ourselves in that part of the brain. So that brain kind of calculates that exchange rate, and we get paid in that kind of neural currency of reward. So it seems to me that when you think about that in an organizational context, an organization that kind of promotes and nudges people to be thankful, practice more gratitude, practice more altruism and recognition, altruism across the board may increase in the organization. And I think that's quite significant when we pair that with most organizations' desire to become more purposeful organizations, which we've spoken about on previous webinars. And study after study has shown that when we offer compliments at work, they improve the performance of us and the people around us. And they're more impactful than negative or criticism. So oxytocin, the well-known love hormone, our bodies crave this hormone when we feel loved or appreciated. Even just shaking somebody's hand or giving them a hug, which we haven't been able to do a lot of in the last 12 months, creates that hormone. And researchers have found that when people work under the influence of oxytocin, they perform better and are more trustworthy at work. And so I think it becomes really important to create more trusting, well-performing teams. And an improvement in that kind of connection and that social capital and community well-being gets people working closer together and gets more success in people's teams. And I think the science behind that recognition can tell us a lot about the kind of culture we want to create at work. And those effects of gratitude on the brain are pretty long lasting. So besides all that kind of enhancing self-love and empathy, gratitude, it actually impacts bodily functions and psychological conditions like stress and anxiety and depression. So we can see that recognition has an impact not just on emotional well-being, but our physical well-being too. And we've got the diagram on screen here of the limbic system, and that's the part of the brain that's responsible for all emotional experiences. So it consists of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the cingulate gyrus. Studies show that the hippocampus and the amygdala, the two main sites regulating emotions, memory, and bodily functions, get activated with feelings of recognition and gratitude. And those areas light up when we experience pleasure, they light up when we socialize, and they're heavily connected to the parts of the brain that control basic emotion regulation, such as things like heart rate, arousal levels. And that's all associated again with stress relief and pain reduction. So studies have shown that receiving and displaying simple acts of kindness or recognition activates the hypothalamus and regulates all those bodily mechanisms controlled by the hypothalamus, of which sleep is a vital one. And we obviously know that sleep is a really important part of our performance at work and our overall well-being as well. So I just kind of wanted to set the scene. Appreciate there's a lot of big kind of neuroscience and psychological words in there, some of which I struggle to pronounce, but I think it's really important that we start to understand and see recognition as a really core part of what it's like to be human. And I think that can really show us how this can impact somebody's performance at work. And so with all that in mind, and I know you know all of the stuff I've just gone through anyway, Jen, but I just wanted to ask you kind of, so with all the work that you've done and the experience that you've got, how important do you think being recognized is to the workplace?
Yeah, sure. And it's a very good question. But before I even delve into that, I want to just quickly touch on something that you mentioned around how giving gratitude and receiving gratitude becomes almost this positively contagious thing that happens in teams. And that really speaks to pro-social behavior. So if I'm receiving recognition, I'm receiving appreciation from those around me, I know how great it feels that dopamine gets released and I feel good. I'm more likely to do that for others. And then I also get a hit of dopamine by doing that for somebody else. So it's just this beautiful cycle that really does influence how we experience our working environment. So pro-social behavior in teams is really, really fruitful. And it helps individuals from their own personal well-being as well. So I just think it's so important that we do understand how this does impact our brain. And when we develop those new neural pathways, it becomes second nature. So it becomes this habit. And that's how it filters into the culture of an organization and the culture of a team. But just stepping a bit back and answering your question a little bit directly, I actually came across this quote by a gentleman named Jim Davis, and it really stuck with me. And he said that people are not battery powered, they are flattery powered. And I think that is so, so relevant. We don't get our energy only from the food we eat or the fact that we exercise, but we actually get energy from flattery, from being recognized and appreciated for the things we're doing well. And even if we aren't doing something well, just being acknowledged that we tried, that as a human, we still try to do something, and let's learn how to do things better. And that all contributes to psychological safety within a team. And I'll go into a little bit more detail at some point around psychological safety. But if we think about the experience in an organization, I mentioned the word culture. And I'm sure a lot of the audience today, possibly part of your portfolio is to deal with organizational culture, to measure it, to put things in place, to start shifting it towards what you want to see as a desired culture. And I'm sure, like myself, I'm sure you have had a little bit of a struggle trying to figure out how to do that, because culture in itself is quite an intangible concept. So we speak about how people are powered up by their environment. A more tangible aspect of culture to measure is climate. So at Peopleful, we really look at the organization's climate, understand it, and understand how it impacts on an individual's well-being, and then ultimately how that influences individual as well as organizational outcomes, like productivity, performance, absenteeism, your intention to stay or to leave an organization. So it's easy to quantify and predict those or any risks on your people if you look at it through climate. So what drives climate? Climate is really driven by the relationships that you have with the people around you, the policies and processes in the organization, the big one, remuneration, which often gets a lot of attention, career progression in an organization. How far can I go? Where can I go? Am I being developed? Am I learning? And then obviously what we are speaking about today as recognition. Recognition is definitely something that powers up individuals. And I'm going to use two teams as an example just to bring this home. And I'll use these two teams throughout the presentation, especially when I speak about the data that I pulled from a study we did last year. So you've got one team, we're going to call them the A team. And this team really, they recognize each other, they support each other, their leader really allows people to contribute in team meetings, their psychological safety is really, really high. And then you've got team two, so we'll call them the B squad. In this team, there's higher levels of bullying, harassment, their leader isn't as supportive, and the team members are almost like pulling each other down. So that they can almost get in favor with the leader. It's just, you can almost feel the difference between these two experiences. One's a positive experience, which is driven by high levels of support and recognition. One is a negative experience, which is really driven by very behaviors that are not conducive to psychological safety. So if we think about psychological safety as that sense of confidence I have that if I'm sharing ideas or if I'm contributing in my team meetings, I won't be ridiculed or rejected by my team. I will be appreciated, I'll feel understood. And that really speaks to that mutual respect that we have, that interpersonal trust in a team. And it is very driven by recognition and appreciation. But Gethin, I mean, you're the expert in employee experience. So from the workplaces that you've been working with, how have you seen the supportive culture and the impact that it has on individuals' mental health at work?
Yeah, so it's all the stuff you just said is really interesting. I think if you look at so I think I've got slide 8. I think it's got a little diagram I kind of pulled together, which we showed at a recognition webinar last week. But the climate stuff you talk about is really, really interesting because it's about creating the organization in such a way that people thrive. So we're no longer measuring kind of return on investment or success as, things like turnover and absenteeism, those kind of pretty old and relatively stale objective measures, and starting to think more about the fact that how do we invest in our people so that they create better products, better customer loyalty, all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's been fascinating over the last 12 months to see just how important recognition is to a business. Because, you know, I wrote about it in my book, and I've said it for years, that employee engagement is something that you don't recognize until the going gets tough. When your business is succeeding and things are going well, you never really notice good employee engagement. But when your business starts to struggle and you realize, oh, actually, I've got these teams of people that pull together and want to help me through. And we've seen that en masse this year, how adaptable and supportive and loyal employees have been. And I just don't think they've, in many cases, and the data tells us this, they haven't had that reciprocated at work. So it's no surprise that there's kind of an awful lot of people who say they're going to be looking for a job as soon as the pandemic ends. And I think we can cut through so much of that by somebody just saying thank you to you. And I think that, you know, the evidence of recognition being a core part of what we need from work is kind of, the evidence is so vast and compelling. We can say with certainty that recognition is a really important part of that employee experience. I read some research last year that said 70% of employees in 2020 said they would work harder if they felt their efforts were more appreciated.
Yeah.
So they weren't asking for more money. 70% of people just wanted to be the acknowledgement that, yes, you've worked hard this last year, and yes, you deserve a recognition for that. But, you know, gratitude and recognition are emotions that directly target building and sustaining those social bonds. Like you said, it's that pro-social responses now and in the future. You kind of set these relationships up to create that kind of network of trust and kind of belonging. And so I think expressing gratitude in the workplace is about building those interpersonal bonds and trigger those feelings of closeness and bonding, which again have been far removed from most organizations over the last couple of years. And employees who practice expressing gratitude at work are far more likely to volunteer for more assignments. They're more willing to take extra steps to accomplish their tasks. They happily work as part of a team. And even managers and supervisors, when they feel grateful, they convey the same. And, you know, we have a lot of evidence around the employee experience and show that when you've got more gratitude and recognition at work, it becomes a consistent predictor of several things like less cynicism amongst your employees, less burnout and exhaustion, more proactive behaviors, high ratings of health and safety, high job satisfaction, and fewer absences and things. So I think it's all pretty significant when we think about well-being and that kind of crucial part that it plays in the employee experience. And we can even find, you know, in studies of patients with asymptomatic heart failure, an attitude of gratitude and recognition was related to better sleep, better mood, less fatigue, reduced inflammation, and better cardiac specific self-efficacy. So again, you start to see that when people feel like this within an organization, it has a significant impact on their well-being and a significant impact on the well-being of the organization. So yeah, I think it plays a really big part, and hopefully that graph on the screen shows you the part, you know, that's all the evidence piece there. The recognition screen is showing the presenter view at the moment, by the way, rather than the full screen.
Sorry.
Controlling that.
Let's see. Is that good?
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome.
That's okay. And so let me kind of turn that back to you. So
yeah,
when the employee experience is improved because of that culture of recognition and thanks, I think the big thing missing from lots of the stuff that I've seen, and I know you've got data on this, and I'm really excited to see it, because what we don't tend to see is, okay, so where's the evidence that it improves performance? Because I can give you all that evidence that it improves the employee experience, it improves employee health. How does that make people more productive or better at their job? So if you've got anything to share on that, I'm so excited to see it.
I definitely do. And very often we get asked that question, you know, how do we take this to the C-suite? As HR professionals, directors of people, how do we prove that investing in not only our people, because we know that they are appreciating assets, but investing in things like recognition, which is sometimes overlooked. So how do we prove that that is actually going to have a financial impact on the bottom line? And I do actually have some data that I want to share with you guys today. So I pulled this data from a study that we did last year, and we we have a tool called the Organizational Human Factor Benchmark at PeopleFull, so OHFB in short. And ultimately, at a high level, this measures the organization's climate, the impact climate has on the well-being of our people, and how well are they going to perform at the end of the day. So typically, we answer two questions for organizations. Are your people equipped to perform at their best? Are they able to act on strategic intent? Do they give your company a competitive advantage? And then the second part of that question is the workplace supporting them in order to do that? So I thought, let me pull a study from 2020 because the pandemic has happened and how we experience work has changed. So I thought, let me look at that data. So this study was done between January and December last year. We had almost 5,000 participants that took part in the study, and from multiple countries around the world, including the UK. So there is a sample from the UK. And what I did is I had a look at all the dimensions because there's quite a few factors that drive climate. So I had a look at those dimensions and I pulled a couple of dimensions together and I created this construct called recognition and appreciation. So this really takes into account individuals receiving feedback on their performance, on whether they're doing a good job or not a good job, but mostly are they doing a good job? And also how much appreciation and support are they getting from their supervisor? So I pulled those together and I had a look at our two teams. So I pulled the data for the A team and I pulled the data for the B squad. So let's have a look. So in the A team, we had around 27% of the sample was in the A team and 14% of the sample sitting in the B team. So recognition and appreciation, very poor. And then obviously for the A team, it is excellent. So answering those two questions, are our employees able to function optimally? And I know this might seem like you know this information already. Of course, if people are recognized, they're going to perform better. But let me actually just show you what the data showed us. So these are scores out of 5 that I'm going to show you now. So they are a metric. Anything below 2.6 is considered poor. Anything above 3.4 is considered excellent. So for those in the A team, their score was 4.2 for their performance. So are they able to function optimally and act on strategic intent? By gosh, yes, they are.
Yeah.
And those that are sitting in the B squad, I mean, it just blew my mind, the complete difference between these two scores. So we know that they will probably not function as optimally, but I didn't realize it was going to be to this extent of 1.8 out of 5 was the metric that was pulled for that team. And then if we look at the supportiveness of the workplace, so looking at my supervisor supports me, I get support from my colleagues, I have information to do my job, I know what is expected of me. Individuals in the A team, almost full marks, almost 5 out of 5, so 4.9 out of 5. And for those that are sitting in the B squad, that dropped all the way down to 0.9. So this really does make that business case for the importance of recognition on the performance of an individual, and then obviously how supportive they view the working environment. So then I got quite curious. All right, so these are the performance scores. What's actually happening to the individual well-being of the team, the members in these two teams? So I had a look at the work-related well-being states, and so we predict risks. So this is not to say that 4% of this team are burnt out. It is a risk for burnout. Right. But it is sitting at 4% for the A team. The trend for this sample was 12%. So if you just compare to what is average, and then the guy sitting in our B squad, that increased to 24% burnout risk, which is, I mean, if that doesn't just sound off alarm bells in your head, then I'm not quite sure what will. From a disengagement perspective, so looking at obviously the inverse of this is work engagement. So work engagement as a state and work engagement as a behavior, those are elements that we measure. But the risk of disengagement for the A team is sitting at 5%. And that increases all the way to 39% for those that are sitting in the B team. So they are most likely not going to engage in what you were speaking about, loyalty, you were speaking about going over and above, so that corporate citizenship behavior, which is an outcome, an organizational outcome. They're most likely not going to be displaying that. Their psychological energy and their psychological desire to be motivated at work is definitely negatively impacted here. And then from a stress-related ill health risk, so looking at it from a physical as well as a psychological perspective, for the 18, there is an 11% risk sitting there. So that's not under 10%, which is why it's not sitting in the same color as the others. And stress-related ill health could also be of something that's happening outside of the organization, so outside of the experience of that workplace. And then for our B squad, that increases to 36% stress-related ill health risks. So if we think about this through the lens of absence, your ability to be productive, presenteeism as well, will definitely be impacted because we can predict those risks will be impacted by stress-related ill health, as we see here, 36% in the B squad. So now if we think about it in numbers, so how much is this costing the organization? I had a look at the cost ratios between these two teams. So for individuals that have got poor support from their supervisor, so not that they don't have that appreciation, they don't feel appreciated for what it is that they are doing, they're going to cost your organization 6.1 times more than those who have good support from their supervisors. And then when it comes to inadequate feedback, so not knowing whether you are doing a good job or what you did that was good. So when we give feedback, it's not only about saying, well done, or giving feedback a month later when it's already passed. It's about being specific, being clear, so the individual absolutely understands, this is what I did that was so great. Those individuals that have inadequate feedback are going to cost your organization. In this sample, we're going to cost that organization 7.3 times more.
It's fascinating. So we should probably say, you're controlling the deck, so you could show me these figures. We didn't prep this in any way. I didn't see these figures before today because we didn't want it to be contrived. I wanted to be able to say what I thought we saw as an organization at Benefex, what we saw with our customers, and what all the evidence was saying. And then hopefully you were going to show me some stuff that proved the point. But before today, I hadn't seen any of this. And if I'd predicted it, I would not have predicted the figures to be this high, because you're looking at 4 or 5 times the negative state from the positive. I think the burnout risk kind of doesn't surprise me. I think there's been a lot of talk of burnout in 2020, and when you look at lots of the reasons why burnout exists, it's because of somebody doesn't really understand what their expectations are at work. So people don't know, am I doing a good job? Am I doing things right? What are my expectations? And I think, as we talked about the recognition webinar last week, giving people recognition for stuff starts to create this narrative of, these are the things you're good at. These are the things people value you doing. This is the stuff the organization likes you to do. And that encourages you to do more of those things and find your place and belong and kind of lean into the skills you've got and the things that you're good at. But and obviously talked about all the ill-related, stress-related ill health and stuff like that. So again, not surprising that's big. And the disengagement, lack of recognition is one of the common reasons why people leave their jobs, no matter what country you look at. It's that lack of appreciation. But I think what's fascinating about everything we've talked about today is this idea that recognition is still seen at this kind of like fluffy, nice to have thing, not a core part of an organization.
Yeah, and I mean, the figures here are really showing that that is not the case. I mean, there's a moral case for recognition. I mean, giving people that sense of belonging and knowing that I'm contributing to the organization. You spoke about purpose earlier. You spoke about meaning. So also, and finding your place. I know that you also use an example in one of the other webinars that I listened to, is where people were recognizing you for the learning that you share, and then how that spurred you on to do more of these type of webinars, where people are really getting a lot of insight from having these discussions or listening in on these discussions and asking pertinent questions. So 100% recognition in that sense does help. And when I was also looking at this data, just on another point that I wanted to bring into the room, sometimes when we think about recognizing and appreciating each other, we go to the almost obvious things like, all right, let's have appreciation circles or give good feedback, and those things are wonderful. So when I looked at what was driving these scores here that we are seeing. So what was driving people to say that I'm going to perform because I have recognition and appreciation? What were the actual unique dynamics that were driving that? There were three things that I found. One was it had a strong relationship, or management style had a strong relationship to these results that we're seeing. And management style we measure by the ability that people have to be involved in the decisions that are made around their job. So if you just have this inclusive environment, collaboration around decision making, include your people, they feel appreciated and valued and recognized just by doing that. So it's not a matter of saying only, it's not a matter of only saying. So it is good to recognize good work, but that's not the be all and end all. So it was management style. So allow your people to participate in decisions. The second one was role clarity. So these individuals that are experiencing higher levels of burnout risk, disengagement risk, and stress-related ill health probably have high levels of role ambiguity. And also by basis of the fact that colleague support might not be there, psychological safety is not really there. You try new things and then you get rejected or ridiculed for it. So your role ambiguity, like where's my place in this team, is low. So just create more clarity around what this person is doing versus what their team member is doing, and making sure that they understand what is expected of them. And then the final one was communication. So not just how we understand communication to be, I'm sharing information with you, but also making sure that that information is not conflicting with other information that's being shared in the organization, that it's clear, it's up to date. So that goes back to giving feedback and recognition a month down the line, 2 months down the line, and heaven forbid only once a year at the final performance appraisals. But really giving up-to-date information is what is driving people's feeling that I'm being recognized and appreciated at work.
Yeah, excellent. So as we kind of come into the last few minutes, please share some comments and questions if you have them. I'll read a few out now. Inja said, I love that people are not battery powered, they're flattery powered. So people loving that. I think that's a really good quote. Julianne Hayes says, thanks for your comment, Julianne. This is fascinating. I'm an investors in people practitioner, and reward and recognition remains one of the key influencing factors in what makes the workplace a great place to work. These metrics are so influential. Thank you for sharing. I'll definitely really interested to see that data, because we just really get to see it, and it's quite impressive, and it's a decent sample size. So it's kind of some really good data. Ina, apologies if I've correct that wrong, but thank you for your comment. Ina says, I suppose that some of the stress-related ill health risks might be related to the COVID pandemic. However, people who feel more appreciated at work seem to deal better with the challenges of the pandemic as well. Yeah, really good point, right? I think one of the things I've certainly noticed a lot over the last 12 months is those organizations that had those networks of support are weathering this storm better than others, because you have people you can rely on, right? So if you feel lonely, if you feel stressed, if your mental health has taken a bit of a kick in, the more people you have, the more social capital you have at work, the more people, the kind of camaraderie of people that will surround you and say, we'll help you take the burden of some of that work, or, take that time off and encourage you to do stuff. And that's really important, right, as well, to have those people around us, right?
It speaks to psychological safety. If you are experiencing high levels of high levels of safety in your environment, you will speak up if something is not going right. If you trust those around you 100%, it has a massive influence.
I have another question here from Inge. Your data is so fascinating, Jen, and you mentioned up front that your tool looks at the unique dynamics in an organization.
Yeah.
For example, what were the unique drivers behind the vast differences in performance scores we saw for Team A and Team B?
Awesome. I'm not sure when that question came through, but thank you, Inga, for that. So it was what I was speaking about around the management style. So get your people involved in decisions that impact on their work, role clarity, and communication. So having that clear, up-to-date, non-conflicting information that will really support individuals to perform at higher levels.
Excellent. And Inga, sorry, I pronounced that wrong earlier on. The data definitely lifts the veil off mental health struggles in the workplace that are considered taboo. Now you have metrics that can show the tangible impact on mental wellness. And again, I think that's really important, isn't it? That we show different metrics. We move away from the idea that just because somebody doesn't turn up to work, that's a measure that they're ill or they're struggling. It's kind of, we need to move past and see people more as an investment, and see not just the cost of us not doing something, but the benefits of us actually taking action. And as you can see on screen, you know, a small investment in recognition can have a big impact on performance. So it's not about reducing costs, it's about how do we be really progressive? How do we get more out of people? Which is fascinating.
And just quickly, Gethin, something that I'm remembering that isn't on the screen right now, I think you made a comment right up front around after the pandemic, people are most likely going to go and find a different place to work, just for how they were not appreciated and supported during this time. I also pulled the turnover intention risks for these two samples. And if I just look at it, those that had poor information and poor support, their turnover intention was sitting at 26%. So out of that sample of 1,000 people, 26% of them are at serious turnover risk. So in other words, they're just waiting for that offer letter and then they're out the door. And to replace 26% of 1,000 people, so 260 people, could cost your organization a lot of money to replace those people.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we could talk about this for a long, long time.
Oh, definitely.
I think I set you up really well, and you knocked it out the park with that data. So thank you very much for putting that together. Really
100%.
If we can move on to the next slide. So please don't go yet, because there's another slide after this I want you all to see. It's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Really appreciate your questions and for joining us. I'm back on the 25th of March at 11 a.m. for our next digital water cooler. I'll be joined by Yulia O'Mahony. Yulia ran employee wellbeing at John Lewis for many, many years, and will be telling me how we can build a business case for wellbeing and get the all valuable buy-in and sign-off that we need. A really rare opportunity to hear from someone who's made wellbeing a success at one of the UK's biggest brands. So please join us for that and don't miss it. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. And also, before you go, we'd also really appreciate any kind of recognition and feedback from yourselves. If you've joined any of these events or before, if this is the first time you've joined, if you're finding them useful, if you've made any changes in your organization because of them, or it's made you think differently about things, if there are other themes or topics that you'd like us to feature in the future, or indeed guests, people that you might know, please get in touch. You can use those contact details on the screen and let us know your feedback. So thank you very much for all of you for joining us. As always, we appreciate you coming along. And thank you so much, Jen, for joining and sharing your valuable insight and data. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm so privileged to be on this platform with you today.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Take care.